Thank you for joining me once again on this channel, where we explore death, consciousness, and the timeless wisdom that transcends every culture and every religion. If you have not yet subscribed, I invite you to join this journey because what we discuss here is not entertainment, but a map for the deepest questions of human existence. Today we enter the second day of the Bardo, as described in the Tibetan Book of the Dead, the Chönyi Bardo, the Bardo of the Luminous Apparitions. To the Western mind, this may sound like myth, metaphor, or mystical allegory. But if we listen carefully, not with superstition, but with philosophical openness, we may find something astonishing. A description not merely of life after death, but of how the mind reveals its true nature when everything we cling to has fallen away. The Tibetan master says, consciousness does not vanish after death. This is not a religious claim. It is a psychological and phenomenological one, because what is death if not the radical stripping away of the body, the senses, the self-narrative, and the roles we once played? What remains is the mind, not the everyday mind shaped by habit and fear, but the raw, unfiltered awareness that no longer has anywhere to hide. In the Chönyi Bardo, the deceased encounters lights, deities, peaceful beings, wrathful figures. But Tibetan philosophy insists these are not external gods. They are projections of the mind itself. 心之所显幻影非真, all appearances are. But the mind's own reflections illusory, not ultimately real. To the Western listener, think of Carl Jung's archetypes, the shadows and gods that arise from the collective unconscious. Think of Plato's cave, where the soul, upon leaving the body, confronts the blinding light of the real. Think even of modern neuroscience, where dreams, trauma, memory, and fear blend into symbolic landscapes. The Bardo is not a fantasy realm. It is a mirror of the self in its most honest and unforgiving form. The second day, the turning point of the soul. If the first day after death is the soul's chance to return to its original nature, to recognize the pure light of awareness, then the second day is the moment where most beings falter. Why? Because the truth is blinding, the light of consciousness is overwhelming, and the self, untrained in honesty, turns away. This is the tragedy of the human condition. We fear our own potential as much as we fear our own shadows. As the second day begins, silence descends. The radiant light of the first day fades, and the deceased stands in a curious darkness, not yet hellish, but heavy, humid, unfamiliar. Something has shifted. The world is no longer out there. It is inside. A distant sound arises, part chant, part bell, part whisper. It calls the soul forward, yet its ambiguity is unsettling. The deceased hesitates. Is this salvation? Or is this a trap? For the first time, the soul begins to distrust its own perceptions. This hesitation marks the doorway into confusion. It is the beginning of the descent into illusion. The 5 lights appear. Without warning, the sky opens. 5 streams of light descend, each pure, each symbolic, each a direct expression of awakened consciousness. But to the untrained mind, they are terrifying. The first is the blue light of Akshobhya, the Buddha of the Eastern direction, the embodiment of clarity and mirror-like wisdom. To the enlightened, blue light is the call to liberation. But to a mind still attached to earthly familiarity, it is too sharp, too honest. Akshobhya extends his hand toward the soul. Do not fear. This is the light of truth. Step forward and you will be free. But freedom demands courage, and the human heart is rarely ready. Beside the piercing blue light, a softer glow appears. The murky, comforting gray of ignorance and attachment. One promises truth, the other promises comfort. And like so many of us in life, The deceased chooses comfort. One step back, one glance away, one moment of hesitation, and the brilliant blue light recedes like a tide pulling away from the shore. A thunderous voice echoes not from outside, but from within. You have chosen ignorance once more. The peaceful procession turns to wrath. Another light emerges, golden, tender, radiant. Within it appear the peaceful Buddhas and Bodhisattvas, compassion embodied, mercy given form. Their smiles are warm enough to melt every fear. Their presence is the promise of salvation. One of them steps forward, a figure luminous and gentle. Even now, return. Let go of anger and craving. Liberation is still possible, but compassion has its own intensity. To the guilty, kindness feels like exposure. To the ashamed, purity burns. The deceased turns away once more, and in an instant the peaceful faces crack. The smiles harden. The eyes blaze. The compassionate forms dissolve into wrathful deities, not because the gods have changed, but because the mind has. The soul is not punished. It is confronted. Because in the Bardo, nothing appears except what we have carried all our lives. And so when we consider this subtle movement of attention, this quiet but decisive turning of the mind, we begin to understand why the ancient texts insist that the first step toward liberation is seeing clearly without distortion, not heroic sacrifice, not dramatic demonstrations of faith, but this, to recognize the exact moment when our awareness begins to slip away from truth and toward illusion, because that moment, tiny, almost invisible, is the birthplace of suffering. It is in that first moment of distortion that anger grows its roots, fear takes shape, desire forms a narrative, and self-deception begins to justify itself. And this is why the masters say, awareness must be swift effort, must be constant, not because life is cruel, but because the mind is fast, faster than our emotions, faster than our intentions, faster than our moral commitments. Without disciplined awareness, the mind outruns us, pulling us into habits we did not choose and reactions we do not endorse. The moral drift that happens when awareness lapses. Think of the last time you spoke sharply to someone you care about. The moment was small, perhaps only a few seconds, but in that instant your awareness narrowed, your breath tightened, and the mind seized control like an impulsive animal. You did not choose to harm them. You simply lost awareness for a moment, and the chain reaction completed itself. And afterward you felt regret. You said to yourself, I didn't mean it. I don't know why I reacted that way. But the truth is simpler. Awareness slipped, and the reactive mind filled the vacuum. This is what the ancients meant by failing to perceive early, failing to persevere consistently. It is not about moral weakness. It is about attentional poverty, a momentary bankruptcy of presence, and the consequences ripple outward. Sometimes it changes the mood of a single conversation, but other times it can alter the entire direction of a life, driving a wedge between partners, breaking trust between friends, or setting a family on a path of silent resentment, all from one moment of lost awareness. Awareness as an ethical power. When we hear the word awareness, in the modern world we often think of self-care, mindfulness apps, breathing exercises, or stress reduction. But the ancients saw awareness differently. For them, awareness is a moral force. It is the guardian of the heart. It protects our integrity. It defends our commitments. It prevents small impulses from becoming real harm. Awareness is the difference between a passing irritation and an act of cruelty. It is the difference between recognizing one's desire and becoming enslaved by it. It is the difference between a fleeting fantasy and a destructive decision. Without awareness, the mind is like a horse without reins, fast, powerful, beautiful, but capable of running off cliffs. With awareness, the same horse becomes a noble companion. This is why the tradition insisted winning against the self is not a matter of force, but of clarity. The self cannot be defeated through punishment. It can only be transformed through understanding, and understanding begins with awareness. Why early recognition matters. Every emotional storm begins as a drop. Every ethical failure begins as a whisper. Every tragedy begins as a subtle misalignment. If you can see the drop, you can prevent the flood. If you can hear the whisper, you can rewrite the story. If you can notice the misalignment, you can correct your course before the path diverges. This is why early awareness is more powerful than late effort. Late effort is repentance. Early awareness is wisdom. Repentance saves us from disaster, but awareness saves us from needing repentance at all. And this is the heart of a teaching. The purpose of spiritual discipline is not to build a rigid moral will that battles against impulses like an endless war. That is exhausting, unsustainable, and ultimately ineffective. The purpose is to cultivate a mind that detects the impulse before it becomes a force, that notices the emotion before it becomes a storm, that sees the confusion before it becomes a narrative. This quiet vigilance is what allows a human being to remain free, the mind's natural tendency to drift. Let us be honest. The mind prefers comfort over clarity, impulse over discernment, and habit over intention. Awareness requires effort. Drift requires nothing. This is why most people live their entire lives, reacting rather than choosing, surviving rather than understanding, worrying rather than awakening, not because they are immoral, but because they are inattentive. And inattentiveness is the universal human disease. It is the root of our conflicts, the engine of our addictions, the silent architect of our regrets. This is why the ancients emphasized constant effort, not heroic effort, not dramatic effort, but everyday effort, steady, gentle, rhythmic, like tending a garden. You do not pull the plant upward with force. You simply make sure it receives what it needs. Every single day, awareness is a garden. Effort is the sunlight.